Let's learn something really quick.
If you got the time, absolutely. And you got the discipline, there's no question about it.
I love that. Yeah, that's a great practice to put into your everyday life, you guys.
You generally regret the things you don't do, not the things you did do. Let me say it that way.
Mic drop. This was just awesome. I love meeting my guests in person, and it's a whole nother animal, and the energy is just electric. You guys, this is your host, Deanna Radulescu with Label Free Podcast. To live your best life, you must live label free. What is good, everyone? This is your host, Deanna Radulescu with Label Free Podcast. To live your best life, you must live label free. As always, bring incredible guests from all over the world, so sit back, relax, and tune in. My next guest is a licensed professional counselor. He is also a spiritual and liberation guide. Please welcome John Labman. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Deanna. Thank you for having me. And, for everybody who's listening, this wonderful woman does a lot of great work to raise consciousness. So please give her a 5-star rating and make sure that you recommend her to other people.
Oh, that was very sweet and very kind, John. I appreciate that. But, I always like to start off the conversation with my guests, like kind of talking a little bit about their path. So yours has not been, obviously, like all of ours, has not been a very straight path. It's been very interesting and very kind of convoluted with unfortunate circumstances. You're a survivor of childhood abuse. You've had some involvement in religious cults, but now you are on this awakened path, which is much more beautiful and much more probably aligned with who you are. Right. But can you kind of tell us a little bit about that journey of going through some of that stuff and finding yourself where you are today?
Well, very briefly, raised with childhood abuse and then a lot of bullying at school. I just was very miserable, unhappy, anxious person, always looking around, waiting for the next shoe to be thrown in my head kind of thing. And when somebody presented a film in the 10th grade to the whole 750 of us that there was a school abroad, international school in Wales that I could go to with kids from 50 countries, my 16-year-old self jumped up and down and went up front and signed up. It was the boldest thing I'd ever done in my life. I was just exploring the first spirituality that wasn't native to my family because I was raised in a Reformed Jewish family. And I was exploring Christianity at the time, and I was praying and saying, God, if you really exist, even though they tell me that I'm not supposed to qualify for this scholarship and get into this school, get me into this school. And if you get me into this school, I'm going to believe in you. And I got into this school, and I went abroad for 2 years, and I converted and became a Christian, and that was the start of my conscious spiritual path. And I thought my life was solved at that point, but little did I know that when there's trauma and abuse in your history keeps popping up, there's something called repetition compulsion. You keep going after the same familiar kind of people who do the same bad stuff to you that happened to you growing up. So I kept finding myself in and out of these religious communities. Once I lived in a commune in California where they had me on a 30-day fast. I came back from that and had to be hospitalized for serious depression. I had electroconvulsive therapy at 20 years old. I somehow or other got kind of rescued out of that, went to therapy for a little while, went back to college, and was finishing college when my parents got divorced and said, well, you need someplace to go. The first summer I stayed at college. Second summer I was invited to join a church community and see about that. And, they were a church that was part of the college denomination, so I felt pretty safe and they were pretty welcoming and loving. But over a number of years, that turned into really a mind control cult where even though we allegedly had repented and, joined our hearts to Christ, and that was my pure intention, we were told by the end that we were worse than Hitler, that we were going to hell, that we were hypocrites, that we didn't really believe in the vows that we had taken to join the church. By the end of that 7 years, I had nowhere to go. I had very little money, and I was pacing the floors every night wondering what in the world I was going to do. Finally, I got up the courage to just say, I can't live like this anymore. I've got to go.
Good for you.
So I put all my little possessions in storage, and I went to a family member's for a night, and they didn't have room for me either. But they did get me in to see a therapist, and that therapist really saved my life. And in that work with her, she said to me, if you really thought you were going to hell and had no hope, you wouldn't be coming to see me.
Yeah.
You would have given up. And she really saved my life and put me on a path to recovery, put me on a path to discovering, yes, in fact, I was a gay man. even though I really didn't want to be. So any of the people that tell you that gay people make this choice as a choice, you can tell them my lived, felt, physical, bodily experiences, that's a lie. Don't believe that. But, okay, I have to live as this person. I'm either going to believe them that I'm cursed for the rest of my life, or I'm going to lose the label of cursed and of hypocrite and of victim and of sinful, and I'm going to see if I can live a productive and wonderful life. And I really had the notion at that time, working with that one wonderful woman in Princeton, New Jersey, that I would like to do that kind of work one day.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the next thing. The next thing was I was a singer. I wanted to go to New York. I had a Broadway coach who was working with Betty Buckley and a number of other big Broadway names. And he said, sure, you can work in the musical theater. Got to come and learn method acting.
Okay.
I came out, I moved to New York, I learned method acting, and I discovered I didn't like performing, and I didn't like the world of the theater, which in those days was pretty sleazy. The director of theater at William Morris told me that, basically implied that if I would sleep with him, he would send me on the road for Broadway productions that were touring companies.
Wow.
And the next week, I quit my acting classes, and I quit the whole business cold, because I was like, no way am I going to do anything like that. I'm not giving up my integrity for this. Forget it.
Good for you.
And so I then started looking around and did some work and moved back and forth between New York and Philadelphia for a couple of years, but landed back in New York because in method acting, you learn how to live in the present moment.
Yeah.
It's really exciting to live in the present moment, but I didn't know anything about doing it off stage. And my second voice teacher, when I was living in Philadelphia, said, you got to come to New York again. I've met some people who will teach you how to live in the present moment in real life. I was like, what? Real life? You got to be kidding me. So I would go to New York from Philadelphia every Wednesday night to sit with these people who were kind of students of Sri Bhagavan Rajneesh. This was the first Eastern tradition that I really worked in. It was 1987. Eventually, I moved to New York and worked with these people for a while. I did my first meditation retreat with them out in Hawaii for a month.
Oh, wow.
And that really, that opened up something inside that was so deeply there and waiting to come out. And that really was the rest of my spiritual path started there. But those teachers, they did breath work and they did some counseling. They did a lot of talk, kind of therapy, but in a spiritual sense. And they did body work. One of them was a licensed massage therapist. When I moved back to New York, I decided I'm going to become a massage therapist so I can work directly helping people, which is really what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
So I started to do that and I had a really great career in New York City doing that. And on Fire Island, if you've ever heard of Fire Island,
Yeah.
the great summer resort for New York. At some point, I realized everybody's always talking to me about their problems. Well, I'm digging into their back with my elbow, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, by then I finally had a partner. We're still together. It's almost 30 years. And yeah, we met in California at a conference. He was living in Dallas, and he moved into my 600 square foot apartment in New York.
Wow.
He and another friend said, why don't you go back and get your graduate degree? So after studying actually energy and psychic healing for 3 years, taking a couple of grad courses at New York University in counseling, I finished a counseling degree in the year 2000 and became a full-time therapist. So that's like the annotated version. I'm almost 70 years old, so that's how
You've experienced so many different lives, though.
Right. So many labels that are all gone, Deanna.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you didn't carry those labels with you, which is good. I think you kind of started embracing it. You didn't feel good to you, so you moved on to the next thing. You kept growing and evolving into something that's just who you are.
Right. Because the labels are a kind of a ghetto.
Yeah.
Right. I could identify myself as gay, but then that kind of stuck me in a ghetto, and I was only doing certain things and certain behaviors. I wasn't fully what's here.
Yeah.
And, and then, so many of those community members were anti-spiritual because they'd been so hurt by the religious.
Yeah.
So I really couldn't be so much openly spiritual in that community. And so that label went, and, the various communities that I learned from, they all had to go eventually.
Yeah. I mean, that's just kind of our path, right? We continue, hopefully we're continuing to evolve and to grow. And I think it's beautiful that as a licensed professional counselor, you're also able to like be a spiritual awakened individual, which sometimes those two don't really mesh. And so you found a way to make them fit together. And I wonder, how does that work for you? I mean, are you still practicing today?
Oh yeah. I saw my last client just before we met.
Oh, okay.
And I was also doing supervisions of clinicians who are now becoming licensed. They need a licensed person to supervise them. So I do some of that too, which is great fun. Both of the clinicians I worked with today had been former clients of mine. Okay. So it's really sweet to be able to, help them along the way too. But no, I still work. And what I found in my graduate program was my thesis was on whether yoga, philosophy, and psychotherapy were compatible. And I found out that, in fact, they were. Carl Gustav Jung was a famous yogi. And there was a famous clinician in Italy, Roberto Ascigioli, who was also a great theorist and gave us a lot in psychotherapy. And a lot of these people were very spiritual people, but not traditionally religious, but exploring. And so I started, even in the early 2000s when it wasn't popular, I started adding meditation and mindfulness practice and breathing practices to my work with psychological clients. And then when I had my initial spiritual awakening in 2001, I started thinking, oh, these people have to know how wonderful it is not to be bound by the label of I. We're talking about the final label, right? This label of I is going to keep me bound by a set of ideas of who this person has to be.
Yeah.
And so what I'm able to do is I match what I teach my clients, because I feel more like a teacher than a clinician. I teach them whatever they're willing to learn. If they're willing to just learn about ego stuff and patterns and what's keeping them bound in old patterns that don't work, then I teach them psychology stuff. If they're interested in spiritual awakening, I can take them all the way through the early awakening stuff and even work with shadow material that tends to come up after spiritual awakening. Because some of the deep stuff that we have held in repression, because we don't want to think that we're really all of that.
Yeah.
That comes up after spiritual awakening when the ego, when the chattering voice in the head is no longer me, and all my ideas of who I thought I was and all my experiences and all my emotions are now coming to the surface. So I'm able to work with all of those now if people are willing to. Right. But I'm not an evangelist for spiritual awakening. I won't do that to people.
Like that's where that, where the boundary is, right? And that's important. Do you find that when people are open to learning or having a spiritual awakening, that helps them heal those pieces of themselves that they initially come to you for?
Always does, yes. Yeah. And in fact, because what you're dealing with when you're dealing with ego is so much thought, what I teach people is a process called thought busting. Is the thought that I'm having, can I actually know that thought is actually true? Mm. And generally, 95% of what we think isn't actually true, right? And of course, you could say that thought in general isn't the truth. Truth is the sense-oriented reality that we exist in. Thought is a reflection of that. That's all. So if they start getting rid of the false thoughts, there's a lot of emotion that comes from false thought. That's how actors prepare for a scene. You create an imaginary scene that makes you feel a certain way. You walk onto the stage, you actually feel that way. Everybody else's mirror neurons in their brains go off, and they feel what you feel.
Right. Well, it's that energy.
Lots of energy, right? Yeah. So we can say, even my emotion can be from a false source, even though it's real emotion. I'm really helping the people to stop suffering based on false thoughts and emotions that are based on false thoughts.
Yeah.
And that works whether they're psychological students or spiritual students. But if they're spiritual students, they can go much deeper, and then a lot of the trauma can come up, that maybe otherwise they're not willing to look at because they think it might define them.
Yeah.
Whereas if you realize you're not really the self that you thought you were, then the trauma is not going to define you either. It's not going to be that you have to live with a label victim for the rest of your life.
Agreed.
As you know, too. You haven't done that, and I haven't done that.
Yeah. No. I refuse to. And I think that that's just like you're pigeonholing yourself and just opening yourself up to more trauma if you are going to be stuck in that mindset. I personally look to grow and evolve every single day. I still have that little man that talks shit to me in my head, but again, you have to be aware like that's a lie that you're telling yourself. And we have to apply discipline to our brains as well as to our bodies. And part of it being a spiritually awakened is to really know that that's a false narrative, and that you know to be in the present moment is really more of the truth, and to embrace that is a lot more powerful than listening to that crap in your head.
It's also when you stop believing the thoughts in your head and some of the emotions that come from those false thoughts, you're then free to find that underneath your true nature is love, bliss, freedom, peace, consciousness, and truth.
Yeah.
In Sanskrit, that's Sat, Chit, Ananda. Truth is Sat, Chit is consciousness, Ananda is love, bliss or contentment, freedom, and peace. And the Hindus tell us in their 9,000-year tradition, that's our true nature. Not only that, they tell us what Jesus told the Pharisees that he was. He said, I and the Father are one essence. They picked up stones to stone him because they thought he was blaspheming. And he said, yeah, but the scriptures say we're all the sons of God. E.g., you goofy people, you're the same that I am. You're the same essence with God the Father. What the Hindus say is, and I know very little Sanskrit, so I'm not trying to impress with Sanskrit, but they say, I am Atman Brahman. This individual consciousness is God itself sitting on the chair. That's what we actually are. So we can even learn to trust ourselves, because if we're telling ourselves lies, we're going to suffer. We don't really need an authority to tell us that we're telling ourselves lies.
True. It's like you're breaking out of prison when you learn to grow and evolve into that spiritual place. Personally, that's what I think. You know,
it is. I agree with you. It is prison. It is kind of the last label. It's like, oh, I don't need your authority over me, and you're not telling me to call myself something. I'm not going to spout your dogma or your doctrine.
Yeah.
I'm free.
You're also an author, John. Can you tell us about your book?
Yeah, the best and most recent book is called Being Human and Waking Up, a therapist's guide for clients and seekers. And it's available on Amazon under my name, John Labman or Jonathan Labman.
Okay.
And it's really workbook. If you buy the book copy, it's an 8.5 by 11 size workbook, beautifully illustrated with original paintings of a friend of mine in the area of the Delaware Valley, and with lots of space to write in the margins and lots of exercises to do to start to learn how to bust your thoughts, how to check where your emotions come from. And it's also the basis of the course that I'm going to teach in the fall, as many people as want to sign up for 20-person courses.
Awesome.
And it'll be a 13-week course called Being Human and Waking Up. I've also written a booklet, I would say, that it would be my gift to your listeners that we'll talk about later, called Taming the Three-Ring Circus of Your Mind.
Oh.
About dealing with the thoughts. That's really the first most important thing that most Americans are hung up on, most Europeans too. And I've written a memoir that long ago that has the whole kind of story of my life up until about 2015. And that's called An Ordinary Being. But being human and waking up, that would be my best offer to your listeners. That will give them the most help if they're really tired of living imprisoned in their thoughts and their kind of broiling emotions. That will give them the most help.
Excellent. And where can people find you, connect with you, and learn more, John?
Well, since you've listened to this level of time, this length of time, you can send me a direct message to @JohnLabman, JONLABMAN, on Instagram, and send me the word circus24, and I will send you a free copy of my book, Taming the Three-Ring Circus of Your Mind.
Excellent. I love it.
And that's how they can connect with me the most. Otherwise, they can find me at simplyawake.com and also on Substack, where I write a Wednesday column called Simply Awake.
Awesome. You guys, I'm going to put those links in the show notes. So if you connected with John and you're looking to break out of that prison in your mind, go ahead and send him a message. Go support him, connect with him on Instagram, and go purchase his book. John, this is the part of the show where I like to ask for last words of wisdom or advice. What would you like to leave with us today?
You are what you've been looking for all of your life. You are the Satchitananda. You are the God on the chair that you've been told is outside of you. So stop whatever else you're doing, whatever else you're chasing, whatever distractions you're chasing to get away from yourself, and take a look at yourself. With a little bit of guidance, you're going to find way more there than you ever thought was possible.
Beautiful. Wow. Thank you so much. That was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your story, sharing your journey, and really showing how to evolve and elevate to a new level despite everything you've been through. Beautiful.
You're very welcome. It's my great pleasure to spend time with you. What fun.
You guys, this is your host, Deanna Radulescu with Label Free Podcast. To live your best life, you must live label free. As always, don't forget to subscribe, follow, rate, review, comment, share, all those good things. And I'll be back soon with more dynamic guests.